Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week on the Dairy Signal. We're excited to jump in this week with a topic that is so important to many of us in the dairy community that have either people that we're working with or we're managers of. And we are going to be talking about effective leadership and everything that truly entails. But before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about today in history. So we are going to talk about a time frame in which many people might be familiar with, thanks to the musical Hamilton, or maybe you are somebody who still remembers your U.S. history lessons back in school. But we're going back to 1804 to one of the most famous duels in American history, and that's with Vice President Aaron Burr fatally shooting Alexander Hamilton. So a little bit of a backstory if you are not familiar with the scene of what I'm speaking of. And that was that after Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr tied in the presidential election, the tie went to the House of Representatives, and that thus put Aaron Burr as the vice president, with Thomas Jefferson winning the vote. During Burr's time as VP, Hamilton started to campaign against Burr, as he was known for flipping which political party he was a part of and what he was wanting to be involved in. And so during this time in Hamilton's campaign against Burr, Burr's character was savagely attacked. And after the election, he resolved to the next election for the presidential election, which he did not get. He resolved to restore his reputation by challenging Hamilton to a duel, or as it was said in those times, an affair of honor. And it was on this day in July 1804 that the enemies met at 7 a.m. at the dueling grounds in New Jersey. And it was unfortunately the spot where Hamilton was fatally shot. And also, sad enough, it was also the same spot in which Hamilton's son had died defending his father's honor in 1801. So, interesting fact about today in history. Also, a couple other interesting things. That was 1914, Babe Ruth made his MLB debut. In 1930, To Kill a Mockingbird was published. And also today is Cow Appreciation Day. So what a perfect day it is for the Dairy Signal to be on Cow Appreciation Day. Before we dive into today's topic, I also have to say a big thank you to our sponsor for the month of July, which is Prairie Estates Genetics. And so if you're looking for a better investment and better return, and for dairymen with better ingredients equals better silage, therefore better silage equals better IOFC, and the best seed is Next Gen Seeds with this. So Next Gen Seed is dairy specific, it's easily digestible, balances fiber and starch, and produces more milk. So the one source of Next Gen Seed is Prairie Estates Genetics, so make sure to check them out at nextgeniofc.com to learn more. And today we are going to dive into all things, as I mentioned earlier, leadership. And with that comes something that, takes a little time building and takes a little bit of resource of looking inwards to see where you really stand. And some of that includes emotional intelligence, some of that includes people skills. But here to talk today more about that, we are joined by Tim Schaefer, who is a certified family business advisor and certified professional business coach with Encore Consultants. So thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon, Tim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's fantastic to be here again.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. We're glad to have you back. I know we've got a lot of information to dive into, so we're going to get right into it. But I do want to remind those that if they're watching live, please interact with today's episode. I know Tim mentioned before we got started that he loves interruptions. So let's make that happen with asking good questions that really apply to not only what it looks like on farm, but maybe you have a family business as well, or something else that this could really apply to. So ask your questions throughout today's episode. But without further ado, Tim, I'm going to actually just turn it right back over to you to get the conversation started.
All right. Hey, thanks. Yeah, today we're going to talk about leadership. And, if we think about the word leadership, my guess is that there's a lot of you that have probably similar ideas about what it is, but that definition varies. And so it's one of those fuzzy terms that I think we're going to get defined a little bit better today, because leadership, it just means different things to different people. But one thing I think we can all agree on is why it's important. Um, in order to scale up our dairies, in order to manage employees, in order to even work with family members, it requires leadership skills. And leadership, quite frankly, you bring that up, especially in dairy, dairy men and women and farmers, people get a little uneasy. It's not something, it's not a mantle that we wrap around ourselves very readily. We'd rather talk about the technical parts of our business, the breeding, the milking, the feeding, that sort of thing. But leadership, it's more about what you know. It's more than the technical skills. It's really how you roll. Because after all, if someone chooses to be led, it's discretionary. Like, we can't force our employees to be led, right? They have choices, they have options, even within family members. Like, being led is an option. I call it, hey, it's not what you know, it's how you roll. It's how you roll through the days, the weeks, the months. And as soon as you have employees or you have family members on the farm, it requires a whole new skill set, right? To be able to navigate those relationships and to ultimately create influence. Now, some people might say, well, leadership, it's about getting people, it's about manipulation. True. You know what? It can be abused, but what we're going to talk about really today is really, it's approaching it from the right aspect of, we're going to do what's right for them. We're going to do what's right for us, and what's right for the farm as well.
So,
Go
Tim,
ahead.
I've got a question for you, right off the bat here. And it's something that you mentioned just a little bit ago.
Mhm.
And it was about how, some dairy farmers are a little bit more hesitant to use the term leadership, and whether it's they are in a leadership role, or that within the hierarchy of the business they have different leaders in different roles. But why do you find it that those within the dairy community tend to shy away from that word or that ideology, if you will?
I think when we look at dairy men and women, and really farmers and ranchers in general, tend on the scale tend to be maybe a little bit more introverted on average. And also it's kind of that Midwest or that rural, we don't like to toot our own horn. We don't like, we get this idea that leadership is kind of like, Patton storming the beaches, in World War II. It's that, follow me, and leadership comes in many, many, many shapes and sizes. And I think I just don't think that we have, I think it's more of an idea in our mind that leadership is only one way. And if we don't see ourselves as that person, it's really hard to kind of wrap ourselves in the mantle of leadership.
Thank you for that. I'll let you continue on, but I did want
Yeah.
to address that, since it is something that people are sometimes, like you said, just a little bit iffy on, if you will.
You know what? We're going to talk about emotional intelligence too. And if there's two words that I wish that someone could come up with a really descriptive synonym, it would be leadership, and the other would be emotional intelligence. It kind of makes us squirm a little bit. So, all right. So the benefits of good leadership, it really goes beyond just simply growing the dairy, running the dairy. It's much deeper. And if we look at these three areas of a stronger business, a stronger family, and a lasting legacy, or a transition plan, or something like that, man, there's nothing in here that really, or very little, that has to do with what we know or our technical abilities. It all comes down to how we lead, how we influence people, how we communicate, how we navigate those relationships. So, it's kind of how we roll. So I like pictures, because I think pictures and models, because they help simplify life. And this is one that we've created as part of our growth operating system. And there's 6 components of it, but one really main component is the people component. We have to have really good, strong teams around us, whether that's family, whether it's employees, or whether it's a combination thereof. And if you have people, they have to be led. and my guess is everyone listening to this today, the people component of their business is one of the thorniest ongoing challenges that they face, and it's not going to go away. But really, what's the real goal, right? When we have people, ultimately, if you're going to, unless you're going to do all the work yourself, we need to be able to delegate outcomes, not just delegate tasks, but to delegate outcomes and know that it's being done right. And when you're able to say, hey, employee, hey, family member, you are in charge of this area, and I know that it's going to be done right. And now I don't have to think about it. I don't have to ask about it. Then you can put your time and your focus on some of these other areas, such as, working through some of the hard issues, the visioning, the finance, all of those higher level things. Necessary skills. If we're going to scale up, if we're going to, right, and that's kind of the trend in dairy today, is being able to scale up. It's been that way for a long time. I don't think it's going away. We need good employees, and we need good employees to make your life easier, because my guess is a great employee, takes so much off your plate, and a poor hire or a poor team, they just add more sometimes than they're worth. But we get trained. We get trained in the technical aspect of farming, and that's important. If you're going to scale up your dairy, you have to have the technical skills to go with it. Because running a smaller dairy, and then, going from, say, 500 cows to 3,000 cows, yeah, there's definitely some changes that happen there. But another component is leadership, and that's really enticing people or influencing people to follow your vision of where you're going. Then there's communication, and that's really making sure that what you want to have happen is happening. Communication is the number one challenge. So one of the things that we do, Amber, is when we go on to a dairy, a lot of times we survey our employees. We survey the employees, and we say, what is the one thing you wish that you had more of? And they all say communication. Communication is in the top three. Communication from their superiors and organization always tops money, right? People say, well, they want more money. No, actually, communication and some of these leadership traits really are number 1, 2, and 3 on most farms. Conflict resolution. Hey, life doesn't always go smooth. Things get complicated. Need to be able, if you're going to scale up, need to be able to kind of work through conflict in a constructive manner and really harness the power of conflict so that it doesn't just burn out of control. Amber, it's interesting. One thing that we find, we like to measure how people deal with conflict as part of our assessment. And avoiding conflict is almost always the number one mode that people go into, instead of collaboration or negotiation or some of these others. Yeah, but that doesn't always work. It doesn't always really work that well. So,
well, Tim, question
go ahead.
for that. When you talk about conflict and communication and wishing there was more communication, are those two often tied together when you see issues on a farm, that there's tends to be more conflict when there's less communication, or maybe vice versa? Just curious as to how those play in tandem.
Absolutely, especially when there's family involved. Absolutely, those two are tied at the hip. Typically, whenever there's we get called in, say, hey, we have a family dynamic we're trying to sort through. More than likely, there's conflict that's gotten a little out of whack, but at the root of it is communication. That's one of the first questions I ask is, okay, what do you talk about? When do you talk about it? Here's another. What aren't you talking about anymore? Like, what's off limits? Boy, you answer those 3 questions, that gets us a long ways down the road to really understanding, what's going on. So yeah, absolutely. Communication and conflict go hand in hand, and more often than not, I'm trying to think of one farm right now or one dairy that has strong communication and also has out of control conflict, and I can't think of any. I mean, they're that tightly wound. So
That makes sense. And when you're talking about avoidance being the number one way of dealing with conflict, is that also in tandem with poor communication as well? Those who have less communication tend to avoid, or is that not correlated?
not necessarily. Not necessarily. We're actually going to cover 5 conflict modes here a little bit later. Sometimes I'll just give you this teaser. Sometimes avoidance is there's not enough time. Sometimes avoidance is it's not that big of a deal. Sometimes avoidance is I can't get my own way, and so I'm going to take the ball and go home, right? As little kids, right? If you don't like that you get called out when you're playing a pickup game of baseball, you just take the baseball and go home. There's a manipulative, sometimes that gets used to manipulate people as well.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
to continue on, since I know you said we're going to hit a little bit more on that later.
Oh yeah, no, that's fine. And then finally, if you're going to scale up, kind of this emotional intelligence, and we like to focus on other people, but really with emotional intelligence, it's being able to manage yourself, your emotions, and then other relationships. And these are the 5 really core skills that need to be honed as you scale up, or preferably before. Even if the dairy is going to stay the same size, man, it really goes to you can get a lot of traction just working on these. I've got a story of a gentleman, not in dairy, but he was in row crop, and he started from nothing, and he scaled up his farm rapidly over the years, and he just kept adding acres and adding employees, but he never worked on any of these skills. He was he was highly competent, right? He knew how to farm, but his leadership skill was, he just didn't work on them. He didn't communicate very well. He had a real command and control type structure. Every single decision went through him all day long. And he grew from a few hundred acres to tens of thousands of acres, lots of employees, and he became more and more depressed, more and more unhealthy, and ultimately miserable, just flat out miserable, because his time was just consumed with chaos because he didn't build the people up around him. And he got out of farming. He got out of farming wealthy, but very unhappy. And he just sold out because he's like, he just refused to work on his own skills. Kind of a sad story. So.
Well, hopefully that's why those listening today are here, is hopefully to gain some better techniques and skills that they can use and better themselves, so they don't have that unfortunate ending.
Yeah. And these skills, if you're thinking about it, you're like, wow, these are adult type skills. Not necessarily. These are things that can be brought up at the dinner table, especially emotional intelligence. Teenagers, they are quick to pick it up. Like, they get it. They may not have the same maturity level as adults, but some of these things that we're going to talk about, they understand, and you can start passing this stuff on pretty quick. All right. So we talked about the skills. Now these are the things that all leaders need. So they need IQ. In other words, and let's look at it. Your best employees need this as well, right? Just intelligence, right? That's what you were born with. It doesn't change, IQ, but it will impact the ability to learn, right? So we need to have a learning farm, a learning dairy, where people have the ability to learn. Then the technical skills, you got to have those. And then finally the EQ, and that's really the ability to navigate the people side of it. I've been asked this question many times, what do you think is the most important? When you think of a leader and somebody that you want to be led by, I asked this to what I call the boots, right? They're the boots on the ground on a dairy. And some of these people didn't grow up in this country. Some of these people barely speak English. Some of them haven't, right? They haven't been to school, but and some have, and so all spectrums. And I ask, what's the most important attributes that you want in a leader? They don't pick. They don't pick the high IQ. They don't pick that they know stuff. They always pick emotional intelligence, the people side of leadership over the other two. Excuse me. How are we doing on time?
We are doing good. We are doing real good.
Okay. So I ran across a classmate recently, and in school he was brilliant. I mean, brilliant. Knowledgeable, full academic scholarships, you name it. Know what he's doing today? He is the lowest employee in a swine breeding facility. It's just amazing, right? So he had the raw intelligence, but he didn't do anything with it. Let's look at TQ. Have you ever run across an employee or a family member that knows their stuff, right? They have the IQ, but they also have the TQ. They know their stuff, but no one wants to work with them, right? No one wants to be anywhere near them because they're kind of toxic. And we see this with lots of turnover in some farms and some dairies, right? They're brilliant, but man, they can't keep people. And then we also know people that we just like being around, and they've got it all put together, but we like them, we respect them, and we listen and watch what they do. Teddy Roosevelt is not somebody that we think about as, he's kind of the more of the leader type, right? And he charged, what was that hill? What's that big hill that he charged up? Amber, do you remember?
Oh, I should know this. I do not.
Some big charge, right? And so this is Teddy Roosevelt, our president, and big lion hunter and everything else. But this is his quote. He understood leadership, and he said, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And that is definitely an EQ sort of statement on leadership.
And I think that has a lot to do with, when we talk about being on a farm, that you've said it multiple times throughout already today's discussion, that it's communication, it's the people side of things. But why does it seem that that's harder to grasp or harder to execute when you're on farm or, working with a bunch of people in terms of leadership? And as you mentioned, even when you have higher turnover and it's something that you need to change or you need to work on, but it's not something that you can flip a light switch and it just happens. So what does that really look like in order to gain these skills and to work towards being better in this area?
Well, yeah. So why don't we see more of it? We see. I think because part of it is when we look in the mirror, we don't see leadership, right? We see somebody that loves our animals. We see somebody that loves to smell corn silage, right? It's the leadership, the people side of it is sometimes referred to, frankly, I hear it. It's a necessary evil. Man, I wish I could have robots for everything, right? So yeah, it's not something that most people wake up to do. It's something that they grow into. Yeah, it is tough, but I will say this: the dairies that really embrace all three of these aspects, they have a lot less stress. They make pretty good money, and they're really able to navigate a lot of the changes around them. We think about EQ as only working with employees, right? But what about navigating the relationships with milk processors, right? That that is right. That is a leadership. That's a part where leadership comes into play as well, being able to negotiate and find a win-win and all that good stuff. What is EQ? It's really the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, and those are the people around you, right? And we say manage, not manipulate, right? We don't want to become sociopaths or anything like that, but we need to get results. Your dairy needs results, and in order to do that, you need people. In order to have people, you need to be able to influence them. And there's nothing wrong with being really upfront about that with leadership. Factors that shape your emotional intelligence are your personality traits, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Different people see the exact same situation through a different lens, right? And I think we've seen that. People, you'll say, well, what's your perspective? My perspective is like, wow, I don't even recognize this event, right? They're totally different. I see conflict as important. As an example, I see that it's important to have conflict, because that's how a lot of times you flesh out great ideas. That's how I look at conflict. I'm pretty comfortable with it. I have a son who's very introverted. He sees conflict only as bad, right? It's only negative because it makes him uncomfortable. And so I think other factors that affect our emotional intelligence are our life experiences and upbringing. If there's a family history of open communication, being able to ask the hard questions, using collaboration to solve problems, that's a very different than somebody that has had really explosive or bad communication, bad conflict, that sorts of things. So, Amber, any questions that have come in or anything like that so far, or should I keep moving?
You can keep moving. I've got plenty of questions, and I know there's going to be more that probably are coming along the way as well. But I don't want to hold you up too much, because I know we're going to get to some of the areas in which I have questions, I believe.
All right. So 5 elements of EQ. And, let's think about who is more likely to be successful. A leader that shouts at his team when they're under stress, or a leader who just stays, in control and just calmly assesses the situation. I think we've been around these kind of people before. I think if we're honest with ourselves, we've probably done both, right? We've probably lost our cool at some point. And then there's been other times when we've been able to stay fairly calm. Being able to manage our emotions, especially around employees. There are bosses, there are owners that one day they're calm, right? They're the nicest person in the world. They're just, easy going. And then the next day they walk in and they're wound up tighter than tight. We have employees that do that as well. What happens is everyone tiptoes around that person, because they really frankly don't know what personality are we going to have today. And that's not showing a high level of emotional intelligence. So being able to moderate and to assess how we're feeling and how we're coming across to people. So it's being, first of all, self-aware. Hey, if I'm feeling stressed out today, being able to acknowledge that and just say, okay, I'm stressed out. I need to be extra careful today not to take it out on the employees. Being able to self-regulate. So self-awareness, self-regulation. I'm able to regulate my emotions to the situation. So if the situation calls for a certain type of emotion, I'm able to supply that. Being able to motivate people, motivate myself, right? We can't talk about motivating everyone else if we don't look at ourselves in the mirror and be self-motivated. Empathy, trying to understand other people's perspective. And Amber, empathy gets kind of a bad rap. because when we use the word, people think, oh, I feel sorry for some person, or it's, it's real, it's a real mushy part of empathy. The best empathy, or the empathy that we're talking about here, is being able to understand somebody else's perspective. And that is, now people say, well, but I don't agree with their perspective. That's okay. That's perfectly fine. It's more of, can I understand where they're coming from? And if I understand how they're looking at the situation, then how do I respond? Right? You don't have to agree, but can you put yourself in their shoes, so to speak? And then also social skills, how we engage with people and work through conflict and connect.
So we had a question that came
Yep.
in, and it's about EQ. So, and I like how they put this, and it reads, how much of EQ is personality based versus what can be learned?
Fantastic. That's the beauty of this. It can all be learned. There are high EQ, high leadership, like we talked about, leadership doesn't come in only one flavor. Man, you can, like, this is a learned, EQ is absolutely learnable, for everyone. And everyone's going to have kind of their different take on it. You take someone that is maybe a social butterfly and very sociable, and that they're going to intuitively pick it up maybe a little faster. But as far as having the skill set and learning it, everyone is capable of it. And that's what's so awesome. Great question.
And I think it helps separate that EQ is not personality.
No.
They're separate entities.
Yep. I thinking a little bit about perspectives, a lot of times people just want you to hear, right? They just want to, like, when you ask somebody their perspective, or kind of, that's an empathy. Hey, tell me how you came to this conclusion. I just want to understand where you're coming from. That's empathy, but that's sometimes not and I fall into this trap, and I certainly fell into it when I was first married, right? My wife just said, would you just be quiet? She said, I don't need you to fix this situation. I just need you to listen. So
that's a great way to look at it. There's another way I had somebody tell me that you don't have to agree with somebody else, but you still have to respect them.
That's
and
right.
I think that fits well into it as well.
Yep. So how do we improve our self-awareness? That's really the first thing. Is so often we're wrapped up in our own head. We only see things from our own perspective. But how do we learn how we're coming across to people? We all have blind spots. We all have easy responses, right? Those, how we communicate, how we deal with conflict, how we think. But let's face it, there are many tools in the toolbox of EQ, and we just need to be able to reach in and grab the right tool at the right time. I call it, the first step we have to understand is our go mode. Like, we have to understand what is the default that we tend to slide into. That's why I'm a big believer in a few assessments. One is DISC. Another, which is a personality, right? To understand your personality, which will help you understand, how you like to communicate, how you see facts, how you see feelings, all that stuff. DISC is really easy. I highly recommend it, really for everyone to take that assessment. Then there's another one called TKI, and that one only deals with conflict, only deals with how we deal with our conflict mode. And then we also have others like the Clifton Strengths. These you can purchase many different places, but they really help understand kind of how we roll, right? It's our go-to modes. And once we understand that, what we're going to find is we have strengths that are inherently built into our personality. But a lot of times, if we overuse those strengths, or if we don't use all the tools, they become a weakness. So an example would be somebody that's fairly dynamic, right? Very sociable person. They can connect with people and such like that. That's all great, right? High EQ. But if you overdo that, it becomes a weakness, and now it's just either annoying or it's or you can't get the work done because you're being so sociable.
So, question on this area, because I love these personality tests, these strength finders, etc. There's such great tools that we have available, not only to know more about ourselves but our teams.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you do with them after? Because I think that's where people get stuck. Is like, for example, on the screen here you have the Clifton Strength Finder, and it's really a nice mix on the top part of it of all four of the different types. But say somebody is like 99% strategic thinking and has no relationship building involved in their top strengths. So, but they're like, I know that's a problem. What do I do now? Or anything in between, because I think that's where we get caught.
Yeah. So the worst thing you can do, kind of like you said, is, oh yeah, well, that was interesting. That was interesting. Now, now it's Monday morning and we go back to work and we don't change anything. So Clifton Strengths, as an example, that's really handy because that works from the premise, and it's a very good premise, that we get more done by staying by playing to our strengths versus trying to fix all of our weaknesses or areas that we're just weaker on. That doesn't mean that we ignore them, but that's the Clifton Strengths. Personality profiles, you have to keep that. I mean, there's some farms that I know, they keep that front and center, and anytime they're going to have a crucial conversation, they pull out this their personal profile and they read through it, because every time that they're going to do an employee review, they look at that. Every time they're going to, that they give feedback, and after a while, they're able to quickly, without looking at it, they're able to make adjustments and say, oh yeah, that person is a DI, or they're a strong S, or such like that, and really make adjustments. Not to manipulate people, but to maybe present information in a way that is most easily heard and understood by that person. So let me give you an example. The S's, very, very high support people, right? They're fantastic. They're the ones that are opposite of the D's. So the D's have all these ideas and they're throwing it up against the wall, and then the S's come along behind and make sure that it all works. That's a fantastic, right? That's great, because we don't want all personality types all on our team, all the same kind. The thing is that D's make decisions very fast, as an example. And D's need to understand that if a D is the leader and an S is one of your employees, you need to slow it down. You need to allow that S time to process the information, time to get comfortable with it before you move on. So that's an example of using EQ, to slow things down, because you absolutely need that S to help implement things. Did I lose you on that, or did that kind of make a little sense?
No, I think that makes good sense, because as you mentioned earlier, you can't have all of one personality type. You're going to have too many hens in the hen house in that way, but you need to balance, essentially have a balanced team, or at least have a good understanding of who is on your team to help direct a conversation to them, if that's correct.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier, there's not one type of personality that is a leader. So I do have some disc profiles of some individuals. And so a D is Donald Trump, right? Not enough said there. There's also an I. Bill Clinton is an I. President of the United States, certainly a leader. An S. Martin Luther King was a strong S, very much process orientated, right? He accomplished quite a bit by having a system and a strategy. And then the C, Bill Gates. Bill Gates is a very strong C. So all very effective people, all leaders, very different personalities. Let's talk a little bit about conflict. we talked about how avoidance is the one mode that people use. And interestingly enough, when we go into either a family or leadership team and we're kind of doing these assessments, for some reason, even more so than DISC or Clifton's or any of the other assessments we use, this one on conflict gets the most attention, hands down, every single time. And it really plays into, hey, there's 5 modes of dealing with conflict. Let's make sure we're using all 5 modes at the appropriate time. Just out of curiosity, Amber, when you look at this, if you don't mind me asking, what would be your guess of where you spend? Where's your kind of your go-to mode for conflict?
I guess it really depends on who I'm working with. In family, I feel like we have all 5 depending on the day and who I'm with. But when I'm at work, I think we're really good at figuring out accommodating and compromising and collaborating. Like those 3, at least in our work setting and from what I experience with people, is really positive.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you hit on the right thing. Is sometimes we do some things different at work than we do at home, maybe.
I think most definitely.
And especially with a family dairy, family farm, we take things for granted, and we really shouldn't, especially with conflict. Like, hey, we're all family, we all know what each other's thinking, and so we're just going to avoid it. Yeah, there's something here too. Is one is the assertive and unassertive and assertive here along this left side. So think of it as taking an active role in solving the conflict versus inactive role. So lots of good stuff. How much time we got left?
We've got about 20 minutes.
Oh, okay. So, question, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go for it.
Pick one of these 5 modes, and can you come up with an example of when the right time to use it is? When is it the right tool?
Well, I'm going to start with avoiding, because I think that's one we've talked about. And I think that the right time to use like avoiding would be in a situation when the other person that you're talking with is so either overly emotional or has absolutely nothing to give to the conversation that's productive. And I think at that point, removing oneself from the situation is probably the best management technique, because there's nothing that's going to get through to the other person.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. When one of the people that I trained under years ago said, dealing with the emotional issues before emotions become the issue. And when people are all jacked up and amped up, it's really hard to have a constructive any sort of dialogue. Interestingly enough, collaboration, even amongst family, gets probably the lowest consistent marks. People just don't use that tool. And I think part of that is that, when we look at collaboration, it's really trying to find that win-win. Like how to let me understand your perspective. What's your perspective? And then how do we create that win-win? That takes a lot of time. And sometimes in dairies, we don't think that we have enough time, or we haven't built a structure around our time so that we can sit down and have those really, really, really deep conversations. And that's what collaboration takes. It takes time. So if you're looking for a quick decision, sometimes avoidance is the right one. Like, yeah, fine. You just make the decision and go, whatever.
So when talking about this, when we're talking about compromising and accommodating, well, and even a little bit of collaborating here, because when I think of compromise, I think give and take. What is the difference then between the other two, collaborating and accommodating, that really differentiates it from compromising?
So compromise is compromise is it's like straight up negotiation, if you will. It's like where everyone kind of feels like, well, like they kind of got the short end. Nobody really feels that great about it, but you have a decision, right? You are able to make a decision and move on. It's everyone wins, everyone loses out of it, right? That's compromise. You know, anybody that's been on a negotiating committee for a union or anything like that will understand what that's about. Yeah. So yeah, that's compromising. Accommodating is simply, hey, sure, whatever. Yeah, whatever you say, I'll do it. So.
Okay. Well, okay. And then on the other end, we've got competing. When does that one make sense to use? Because I can see the other four management techniques here for conflict and when they're used, but competing, I'm not sure I see a positive reason for this one.
Oh, okay. What happens, Amber, if you have an employee that, or a family member, right? Let's just say that you set some standards on your dairy, and you find out that one of your employees or one of your family members has been driving drunk with the company truck. Happens, right? Right. This is a financial issue. This is possibly my guess is driving drunk at the company truck is not one of the farm's core values, right? So you're violating a lot of things. That is absolutely where you just, that's an example where it's like, no, we're not, like, I'm going to take this all the way to the mat. This is not going to happen.
Okay, that makes sense. It's looking at it more in terms of, I don't want to say putting the law down, but less of a head-to-head competition between two people.
Oh, yeah, and especially if there's a these are usually bigger things, right? Competing is usually it's usually things that core tenets or core principles or core values are being violated on, and then you absolutely take it to the mat. Let me, like, I don't know if this is applicable. Somebody comes up to you on the mean streets of Milwaukee and says, "Hey, give me your billfold." Yeah, you're going to give it to them, right? You're going to accommodate them. Hey, take the billfold, whatever. The loss isn't that big. If on the next breath they come along and they say, "Give me your child," right? Man, right? The mama bear comes out. I mean, everyone's going right down to the mat forever. I mean, that's just, there's some things that are so important on that you absolutely have to compete on.
That makes sense. We did have a question come in during this time. So I will read it, and it reads, how do you get comfortable with conflict after having bad experiences previously? So I think this goes back to when you were talking about way earlier that you didn't have a good experience, or conflict was always somebody blowing up or getting mad. So how do you reframe or reshift what you may previously have known or experienced?
That is tough. And if it's really bad, I would say bring in some outside help that can kind of be that buffer, that middle ground. But if it doesn't require that, really acknowledging it. Hey, you know what? Let's get together. We're not going to solve. It goes back to the communication thing, right? Let's get face to face. Here, we'll go here, because now we're talking about communication, right? Oh, let me go back. There we go. Let's get face to face. This is a very important conversation. We're not going to text. We're not going to phone. We're not going to Zoom. We're going to get face to face, and we're just going to acknowledge that. I want to hear your perspective. We're going to acknowledge that things didn't go well, and really commit ourselves to doing a better job. And what do we need to do? It sounds simple. It's not. It's hard. It actually is simple, but it is very difficult to do, to reset that. But it absolutely is possible, as long as people really as long as they're not in that competition mode where one person feels like they got to win and the other person has to lose. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that makes sense, that it's going to be one of those things that takes time to really reframe.
Yeah. And, and it makes us uncomfortable, right? It makes people uncomfortable because it's like, man, just give me a breeding problem. I can solve that. I can look it up in a book. I can do all this stuff, right? A lot of this stuff is it's a lot deeper. It's very right. There's no extension program, or anything like that, or a rep that you can call on. And a lot of times it's private too. People hesitate from bringing in trusted advisors or even a trusted neighbor to help facilitate it and move things forward. But sometimes that's necessary. Another way to improve EQ is with the proper use of communication. Like we talked about, communication, it's usually the top 3 issues on every dairy or every farm that people wish was better. And so we have to use the right tools for the job. Just like we use the right tools for conflict, we have to use the right tools for how we communicate. And people have a go-to mode. Like, I think we all know people that you can't get them off the phone. And then we have other people is like, I cannot believe my kids tell me this is normal. It's perfectly normal to break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend via text, or better yet, not at all. You just you just unfriend them, right? Those are all communication styles. Maybe they're effective, maybe they're not, but we have to be able to, even on our farms, we have to be able to use the right tool. So when speed is necessary and it's just about transactional, like, hey, this needs to be done, that needs to be done. Yeah, texting, WhatsApp, emails, all perfect for that. But when the stakes are high, we need to realize that this cannot be emailed, it cannot be texted, it cannot be on a phone call. Maybe we need to get face to face. And just understanding, right? EQ is about understanding when to use that right tool. Yeah, never get bad news. One dairy told me, and they were talking about their supplier, and they said, man, if that piece of equipment doesn't show up on time, I certainly don't want to hear about it via text. So
fair enough. I don't blame them.
All right. Functions of a team. Now, this comes through a book by Patrick Lencioni called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And I think most dairymen and women, we're very results driven, very data driven. But we have to do heavy lifting below on some of that EQ type things in order to get the results. And number one at the bottom is we need to create trust. You say, well, that's not hard. Like, I'm trustworthy. I pay my employees on time. I don't lie. I don't cheat. True. That's all good. But there's 8 other elements. I'm going to go through them really quick. One is we have to be clear, right? So when we give clear objectives, clear communications, a clear vision, trusted leaders, they're very open and transparent, and they frequently communicate. And that creates clarity. It creates clarity around short-term goals, long-term goals, motives, etc. Another thing is that they have compassion. No one's perfect. I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. They're not perfect. And so just realizing that people are going to screw up, even your best employees, and having a level of compassion or understanding. Another component is having good moral character. In other words, you will build trust. All leaders build trust when they walk the walk, and they demonstrate integrity in everything that they do. When leaders do that, it sets a standard. Of course, we talked about competency. We're going to talk a little bit about commitment. Need to be able to follow through, right? So if you say as a leader, I'm going to do this, then you have to be able to do it. We can't expect things from our employees that we're not willing to do ourselves. right? So a big one is we expect our employees to show up on time. We expect our employees to, right? But what does that say? What does that say to our employees when we're always late for an employee meeting? Right? That degrades trust, and that sets a standard as well. Another aspect is being able to connect with people, right? Being able to understand what their goals and what their dreams are, and that builds trust. Being consistent, being predictable, and then once again, just kind of being open. Not if you there isn't one leader out there, there isn't one owner out there that hasn't screwed up. That's okay. Own up to your errors. Don't blame other people, and don't hesitate to ask for help. Right, asking for help is a great way to build trust and really build that team cohesion. So, ready to move on?
I think so.
All right. So we need to be able to build high emotionally intelligent leaders. We need to be able to hire and develop people around us. Because remember, we need to be able to delegate outcomes, not just tasks. Being able to delegate tasks like Richard, that farmer, that will get us a ways down the road, but it won't get us all the way down the road. We need to get other people's perspectives, and we need to see other perspectives. So often. Now, dairy does a really good job. So I work in dairy. I work in many different parts of ag. I think dairy, especially PDPW, really encourages this. Get off the farm. Go talk to other. Go visit other dairies. Utilize peer groups, PDPW, workshops, podcasts, internships. Build that broader perspective about how other people are managing and leading. How, being able to brainstorm how other leaders are dealing with the situations, and spending some time on leadership, even though it makes us feel a little uncomfortable, it will lead to lower turnover, typically higher profits, even in a tough milk economy, certainly lower stress. Family dynamics, I've yet to see a family farm blow apart when the individuals show leadership abilities with high emotional intelligence, and ultimately, if you plan on passing the farm on to the next generation, stronger transition plans really come from that as well. So I guess remember, it's more than what you know. It's more than how smart you are. It's how you roll. So that's it, Amber.
I was just going to say, I think that's important. And when you said lower stress, I don't know a dairy farmer who would not be all about lower stress.
Yeah.
Everybody wants higher profits and everything else, but I think lower stress right there, that hands down is one of the biggest things that I know can help anybody. So thank you for all of the information you had this afternoon. But before, we wrap up today, I really do want to ask, we went through a lot. So what's one or two key points that you really want to drive home with today's listeners? One or two things that really just will make all the difference.
You really need to be self-aware, right? It's that self-awareness, understanding how you roll, understanding what your strengths are, and understanding your blind spots. And whether that's through some assessments, whether that's through some coaching, asking the people that are around you, getting feedback. As an example, sometimes we think of employee reviews as being one direction, right? I'm the boss. I'm going to review the employee. That can also be flipped around the other way. Give me feedback on how I can better lead you, right? Because we need to understand our blind spots. And let's face it, just because we understand them doesn't mean that they're instantly fixed either. But being self-aware is the number one first step.
I think that's the best way to leave today's message, because it encompasses everything we talked about. And there's so many tips and tricks and tools that we discussed earlier, but it all starts with that self-aware piece, that first piece of the puzzle. So Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Tim. I know I have a lot of notes written down, just a lot of interesting things to noodle on here this afternoon, and I can only imagine everybody who listening has the same notes or same thoughts running through their heads. So thank you so much for your time here today.
Thank you. Yep, it was great.
I also want to say a quick thank you to Prairie Estates Genetics once again for their sponsorship of the Dairy Signal for the month of July, as well as to all of the other partners that we have here on the PDPW side of things. You can learn more about them by heading over to our website and visiting PDPW Prime. For now, I wish you the very best for the rest of your day. If you're looking for another episode, join in tomorrow. We're going to be talking about ice cream, as it is National Ice Cream Month. So tune in for that. That'll be a great episode. But for now, stay safe. Have a great Tuesday, and we'll see you here tomorrow on the Dairy Signal. Bye now.